Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our talk. Our topic today is nation-state Moneymule's hunting season, APT attack targeting financial institute. So I'll first start with introducing of myself. My name is Qian Shen. You can just call me Ashley. I'm currently an independent researcher.
My name is Jung. I'm researcher of threat intelligence team in Korea Financial Security Institute. And this is Kyungju Kwak. He also works for same company with me. He is not able to come here because he has to take care of his 200 babies.
Okay, so first, here's our agenda today. First, we'll start from some background of our research, and to explain our finding, we will show 4 attack cases identified from these different attacker groups respectively. And after that, we will show some recent change and discovery that we observed in the latest attacks from this group. And before the conclusions, we will summarize our research with the TTP and key finding and that we observed in the past few years. Okay, so first, the background. I believe from our topic, most of you already know what we're going to talk about today is about some nation-state attackers and the APT attack. So for the term nation-state attackers, it's referred to as a group of hackers who mostly doing cyber espionage attack, and their main targets are mainly some government or some large corporations, and their motivations are usually some confidential data or some intelligence data from their targets. And what about the Moneymule that we are talking about today? Usually when we talk about Moneymule, it refers to some criminal, not only in cyber, sometimes also a physical criminal. And they usually target, their motivations are usually gaining money. So before we have observed some cyber criminal, they target some banks or some organizations with financial service to do money transactions or doing some fraud to get money. So before, we identified these 2 types of attack quite differently, no matter on the motivations or the tools or the attackers. However, our observation shows that some nation-state attackers are shifting their focus to join the battlefield of Moneymule in the past few years. So who are these attackers? Basically, they are 4 attacker groups that are believed are Korean Peninsula origin, are conducting attacks targeting financial sector and aim for money now. The first group is called Lazarus. This group was disclosed in 2016 by a report published by Novetas called Operation Blockbuster. This group, their main targets is domestic government and some financial sector, and it's believed their main purpose is to cause social chaos. So before they have conducted some major incidents, including some large-scale DDoS attack targeting US or South Korea, and also they have conducted an operation named Dark Soul. It's an operation that targets many ATM machines and also the broadcasting industry, including TV stations in South Korea. And the most well-known incident of this group probably is the Sony Pictures attack. And the second group is called Bunorov. These groups is kind of different from Lazarus. They mainly don't cause social chaos, but they are aimed for financial profit. So they target a lot of global and domestic finance institute. And in 2016, some reports have revealed their large-scale attack targeting some SWIFT network in the bank and caused a lot of money lost. Also, last year we discovered that this group also conducted some attack targeting Bitcoin company too. And the third group is called Andario. Different from the first two groups, these groups, in our early observation, is more focused on the intelligence gathering. So before we have observed this group, they target some defense industry to gather confidential data, or some like cyber command center. And however, in last year, they also started to target victims in the financial industry too. We discovered they target ATM machine in South Korea, which we will explain about this incident later. And the last group is called Reaper. This group is relatively newly identified groups, and it has many different names, APT 37, scar curve, blah, blah, blah. And these groups, they, in the early stage, they also did a lot of intelligence gathering. However, they also start to shift their target to targets some financial institute too. So this is a timeline that I list some of the major incidents attributed to these four attacker groups in the past few years. Not all of them are targeted financial industry. I marked the incident targeted financial industry in yellow so we can see how often they became the victims. In this timeline, you could see some infamous incidents. For example, the Bangladesh bank hack happened in February 2016. Or the WannaCry ransomware attack happened in May last year. These two incidents are both attributed to Brunnerov Group. Also, in last year, October, a bank in Taiwan was compromised, and the Shift network was compromised too. This incident was attributed to Lazarus. The latter incident was revealed in this year in February. A zero-day flash vulnerability, user-free vulnerability, was disclosed, and it was discovered deployed in attack cases from the Reaper groups. So from this timeline, you can see in these past few years, they conduct a lot of attacks targeting the financial institutes. So even they are believed to be nation-state attacker, they still try to earning for profit from their attack. So in the next part, we will introduce 4 attack cases that we investigated and attributed to these 4 groups. And this is the first case we are going to introduce. It's a attack targeting a major bank in Korea from the Brunnerov Group. So before in 2016, we rarely observed Brunnerov attack in South Korea. However, from the early of 2017, we start to frequently detect their attack. And this incident was discovered in March last year. Their target is one of the top 5 banks in South Korea. They target not only the infrastructure of the bank, but also the employee in the bank who is in charge of the SWIFT system. And in this attack, they mainly leverage a vulnerability which exists in the VDI program deployed in the bank infrastructure. I will explain more about it later. And this attack actually, fortunately, it didn't cause a lot of damage because it was detected rapidly. Eventually, only 2 personal PC was infected. So this is the vulnerability that I mentioned. It's actually the NumPy file sharing feature in the VDI program. The NumPy file sharing feature is actually a very common feature provided by many virtual environments, in this case provided by the Windows Virtual PC. However, the problem is that the VDI software manufacturer, when they are setting up the program with the Windows Virtual PC, they didn't disable the NumPy sharing function under the setting of 2 segregated network. What do I mean 2 segregated network? We can see this picture for a more clearly image. And the box you see here, do you see my mouse? No. This box is the network environment inside the bank. So you can see there are 2 VLAN. The banks split their network into two VLAN. VLAN A contains some hosts with some critical data, and including the Swift systems also in this network, and some important data of Swift network. And this VLAN is not allowed to access the internet. And the second VLAN, VLAN B, is VLAN for most of the employee in the bank. So this VLAN is capable of accessing internet. So when the attacker attacked the bank, they send a spear phishing email which attached the malware. And then when the employee opened the email and got infected, the malware activated the hidden NumPy functions in the VLAN B host, and then spread the malware into VLAN A, and then search for the host with critical data, and then steal it to VLAN B. From VLAN B, they send the critical data back to C2 server. Instantaneously, and the VDI software manufacturer insists that the file sharing function, the NumPy functions, via NumPy is disabled under their setting. However, from the malware, it proved that it was in fact just hidden, not disabled. So the attacker figured it out, and they used this feature to do the penetration. There are two malware samples that we found in this case. They are both a kind of malware named Manuscript. The Manuscript malware has three main features. The first is to search in the internal network for some specific hosts related to Swift network. How do they do that? I will explain later. And the second is they will activate the NumPy of specific process. In this case, it's the vnsao.exe. This process is normally in charge of the seamless application under the virtual environment. And in this case, it's also in charge of the management process of virtual machines segregation program. So after it activates the NumPy, it will steal data from the internal segregated network by using this NumPy, and then send this data to the C2 server. And because after the host in VLAN A is accessible, the malware needs to know which host contains the critical data they are looking for. And we found this function in the malware that this malware is searching the computer name start with PB. So we start wondering, what does it mean? And then we figure out all the hosts in this bank follow a special naming convention, like a type and then employee ID to name their computer name. So the type is defined by different apartment or different type of host, and the type PB is actually means the targeted banks, their confidential data PC. So it means that before the attacker, they compile this malware, when they are developing it, they already know the naming conventions, and they also already know which host what kind of prefix is the host they are looking for. And this screenshot is showing the NumPy operating functions in this malware. When this malware is running, it will try to activate and see the NumPy and then connect to other hosts with this file. After successful connecting, the malware will read some data and write the data to the pipe directly. And this screenshot is showing one of the most recognizable functions of the malware Manuscript. After searching some specific files from the infected PC, it writes the results in a special structure into a log file. The structure is like this. And this structure is applied to the records and write the searching file results into a file. And you can see in this structure, it represents the file type and the file name and the length of file length. And in the beginning of this structure, there's a 4-byte flag. And there are three kinds of different flag. If this is a normal file name, it will flag with FC. And if this is a directory, it will flag with GY. And then if this is the representing the end of file, it will flag with a double star sign. And for the CNC server configurations, it will be right into a registry under Microsoft software. The data in this registry is like shown below. You can see it's in plain text. So you can see the IP address directly. When the malware sends the victim data to C2 server, it will pack this file into some certain bundles and name as some specific file names. In the malware, we can see this code, and it's actually encoded with a function, and this is the decode function that we found in the malware. After decoding, you can see here's the plain text, and there are some file names in this string. It means the pack bundle of victim files that's sent to C2 server. Okay, so that was the first case that attacking a Korean bank by Bunarov Group. And the next case we want to introduce is an attack targeting ATM operator company and ATM machines in South Korea. And this operation is called VNX ATM. This operations was first started from 2015, but it was eventually discovered in last year, in March. And their target is an ATM operator company, and they provide and manage over 2,000 ATM machines in South Korea. They use mainly two vulnerabilities in this attack. The first is a zero-day exploit to an antivirus software used by this ATM company. And the second is the misconfigurations and management between ATM machine and the ATM update server. We'll talk more about this. And like the malware in this attack and their TTPs are attributed to a group named Andariel. And unlike the first instance, this instance actually caused a lot of damage. Totally about 1.9 million card information was stolen and eventually sold in the Chinese black market. We investigated this case with the national police in South Korea, and we collect the hard drive in the ATM machine. The picture in the right side is showing an ATM machine in front of MC, my partner's company. So MC also used that machine to do the withdrawal, and his card information is stolen too. Sorry. And this graph is showing the attack vector of this case. In the red rectangle, it's indicated the network inside the ATM company. And you can see there's an antivirus server. So this ATM company, they use a kind of antivirus that install on every ATM machine. And the server of the ATM update server is located inside the ATM company's network. And the attacker, they develop a zero-day exploit to exploit the antivirus server. And then after they compromise the server, they deliver the malware through this server to about 60 ATM machines. They are connected to it. And when they infect the ATM machine, interestingly, they found a pair of credentials on the ATM machine, which is the account and password, and they also found an FTP server. So they eventually figured out this FTP server is actually located in the ATM company network. It's a ATM update server, and the credential is used to log into this FTP server. So they attack this FTP server and then compromise it and use this server to do the update of their malware. And when the malware collects information on the ATM machine, they send the data back to C2 server. This is the program we found on the C2 server that used to exploit the antivirus software. The tool first will try to scan the open port of the software. And then when the connect success status is still showing here, then you can start to send file to the server and run the file on the server. These two tables here are showing the sample we collect in the case. We list all file names and the CNC infrastructure here. You can see here are some sample, mostly they are remote access tools, and some are for data extraction. Also, we found some public RAT and web show. And here's the classification. There are some keylogger, and there are some dropper, and RAT, also web show here. Here's the malware timeline that we made with the compile timestamp of the samples we collected in this case. You can see from this timeline that although the attack was discovered at this point in March last year, there are some other malware that are compiled more earlier than this time point. And these malware are mainly doing information gathering. So as hypothesis is that this group of attackers, they compromised the ATM company in 2016, about in November, and then they do the reconnaissance, try to figure out where's their important data, where's the critical data, and then prepare everything, and then start to attack in March. This table is showing the RDP access log on the compromised server. There are IP address from the US, from Canada, from Turkey, and among all this IP address, we found one interesting IP address, which is from North Korea. Here's the most important malware in this operation. We found many different named malware with this different name, but they are actually the same malware doing data exfiltration. So from the functions here, you can see the malware first search for a file, start with the naming conventions of the date and CHVA files, and then it will search for the journal file. What is the journal file? Journal file is like this. The journal file includes some transaction detail, include date, number, time, request amount, and the balance. And after it collects this information, it will send them back to the C2 server. Interestingly, the C2 server here is also a FTP server, so you can see a pair of credentials that attacker used to log into this FTP server. It's Achilles, we don't know why they use this name. And a file named 1msnb.tmp will be sent to FTP server. So remember I talked about they will search for a file named CHVA. What is this file? We discovered this file on the C2 server, and when we opened it, we look at the text inside. We don't know what it is. We totally don't understand it. We thought it's some kind of encoded string or something else. We don't know. But after investigation, it was actually not encrypted. It stored a bunch of card information data as following the standard structure of the IC card. So you can see actually here is the IC card number, here's the expiration date, CVV, card issuer, card holder. Every information is stored in this file. But how can this kind of file exist on the ATM machine? The truth is this file is generated by the maybe the developer or the programmer of the ATM manufacturers. They use this log to do some debugging. And remember I say only 60 ATM machines were infected and this kind of log are collected. These 60 ATM machines all have this log. So it means that attacker already know that only this 60 ATM machine with this kind of debugging module will generate this log. So they target this to gather this information. Okay, so after the ATM hack case, now my partner will introduce some attack targeting Bitcoin company. What? No pen.
People talking about the Bitcoin exchange hacking, I'm going to simply introduce the background of the Bitcoin exchanges in Korea. The table in this slide lists for famous Bitcoin exchanges in Korea. It depends on how large and popular they are. The transaction amount per day vary. Exchanges B is the largest one. The transaction amount per day is about 735 million. I think it is great reason to hack. In last year, 4 Bitcoin exchanges were attacked. Attacker impersonated the public institute like police agency and financial security institute is my company, and major banks, etc., to send spear phishing emails. 9 different email accounts were used in the spear phishing email attack. 4 out of 9 email accounts were stolen, and the rest were confirmed created by the attacker. The attacker deployed mobile malware to compromise the mobile phone and passed the SMS authentication to create a new email account. The detail of the mobile malware was disclosed recently by Palo Alto and McAfee. Their research has mentioned that the mobile malware has some similarity with the Trojan manuscript from Vulnerov, and they have linked the malware to Lazarus Group. However, they didn't know who was the target. In fact, the mobile malware was deployed in the Bitcoin exchange hacking campaign. We obtained a sample shared by the government investigative agency related to the Bitcoin exchanges attack. And the sample is very similar to the sample described in the Palo Alto reports. Totally 25 people related to the Bitcoin exchange were targeted in this campaign. They received emails attached with malicious HWP documents, which is the most popular word processor in Korea. It like Microsoft Office. The attacker used the vulnerability of Ghostscript interpreter. It installed with HWP processor. Therefore, Ghostscript was removed in the recent version of HWP processor because of the vulnerability issue. However, many people are still using the old version HWP. Besides the vulnerability, Ghostscript can also create files without any vulnerability. We will explain it next pages. This graph is showing the attack vector of this campaign. To send a spear phishing email, the attacker not only used compromised email account, but also new email account created by them. In South Korea, the largest email service provider require SMS authentication during creating email accounts. So the attacker infected some mobile phone with the mobile version malware, then used the compromised phone to do the authentication. After that, they sent phishing emails to deliver malware several times from July to August last year. After the malware successfully installed on the victim's machine, mobile machine, it connects to C2 server and sends to victims information. This is the attack timeline of Bitcoin exchanges from May to August last year. Totally 8 spear phishing email attacks targeting users of Bitcoin exchanges and exchanges service providers. The first attack was launched in May last year. The attack targeted users of Bitcoin exchanges, and after 2 months, the target of the attack has changed from user to exchange providers. I will talk about what happened last year in May, and 2 out of 8 emails used by the Bitcoin exchange hacked. The first attack in May last year was targeted at the Bitcoin exchange users. They impersonated National Tax Service and guided victims to open the attached file. The email shows in the slide is the actual spear phishing email. You can see the translation at the right side. This email was sent to many Bitcoin exchange users, but it wasn't confirmed how many users' information was leaked. The malware dropped by this spear phishing email is similar to the malware manuscript from previous case hacking Korea Major Bank presented by Ashley. Let's look at the red scale on the image. It's a typical feature that unique string are used in storing information from infected PC. Besides those codes, we could see lots of connection of C2 communication protocol, Windows API decoding function, and log file creating function, and etc. From these two samples. After targeting the exchange service users in July last year, they start to attack the Bitcoin exchanges. They impersonated my company, the Financial Security Institute. The image on the left side is the email, and the right side is the translation. The attached file is a document that what was actually issued by my company, but they embedded malicious code and malware in this document. The file attached in this email is a HWP file. When you open the malicious HWP document with analysis tool like the left image, you can see the 3 PS files in bin data path. These PS files are all malicious, and PS files are compressed with G library. After decompress, you can see the postscript in this file. This is an infographic showing all files dropped by this sample. 3 malicious postscript files are included in the attached HWP file. Among these 3 postscript files, bin 0001.ps file creates HNC check.lnk file, and bin 0002.ps file creates HNC WB080.bin file. PostScript language can create without vulnerability, and the LNK file is a trigger to execute the bin file. And I will explain more information on the next pages. The first PostScript file is simple. It creates the LNK file in the startup path. This shortcut file has command that executes the bin file, which is created by bin 0002.ps file, and the binary is a Trojan downloader. The malware will start to execute when the system reboots. And this is the third postscript dropped by the HWP file. It exploits the vulnerability of Ghost script to activate shellcode. The attacker used two kinds of methods to drop the malware, both LNK file and the vulnerability, to make sure the sample works. The third postscript contains some postscript and XOR encoded postscript with shellcode. Also, it embedded two malware P binary. One is for 32 bits OS, and another one is 64 bits. They are both the same Trojan download as the bin file. The PostScript would decode the encoded PostScript with a 4 bytes XOR key, and eventually running the shellcode to exploit the vulnerability in gs32dll.dll file, which is in fact the GhostScript library. The PostScript will also decode the P files and the shellcode. Shellcode will inject the payload into memory and execute directly without dropping any files. And the vulnerability exploited by this script is kind of similar to CVE 2017-0261. The process of the exploitation PostScript works in order of read and execute and close. And the vulnerability triggered in the process of close. Through the ROP chain, the shellcode can get execution permission to load additional embedded malicious code. And finally, inject the payload into the specific system process, usually the process of explorer.exe. When the downloader payload has been executed in the memory, it collects infected system information and sends to the information C2 server. Also, it will try to download another malware, but however, we couldn't get the second stage malware because it was already removed from C2 server when we investigated. The C2 server, in this case, is also a compromised website in Korea. And this is the second case of attack targeted the Bitcoin exchanges. It is an interesting case. The spear phishing email impersonated a detective at police station. And in the email, the sender asks the receivers to check if there is a member who used the Bitcoin wallet addresses list in the attached Excel file. This case has two attachment files. One of them is PDF file, another one is an Excel file. It's different from the case one. The attacker didn't use HWP documents. The normal PDF file embeds a photo of scanned police ID card. It's trying to convince the receiver that the sender is an actual police officer. And the malicious Excel file includes malicious VVS macro script. Once opening the file and execute the script, a file named svchost.exe will be created and executed. Like I mentioned before the page, the decoy PDF file contains a scanned police ID card photo. This police ID card is real. It seems like the scanned police ID card was leaked through a known path.
Okay, so after MC introduced the Bitcoin instant cases, our last case is about an interesting sample targeting possibly a bank in Egypt, and this attack is from Reaper Group. So before I explain the malware of this case, I would like to give you some backgrounds about these samples. So this samples is about a bank named O Bank. It's not its real name. I just don't want to reveal the full name and so use the first letter. And this O Bank is run by the O Groups, which is based in Egypt and has branch in North Korea. And this O Group also run a telecommunication company in North Korea. It's called K Telecom. And the target, when we investigate, we we found several evidence to prove that this target has connections with this old bank in North Korea and also the K telecommunication company located in Egypt. And the target is located in Egypt. And these oil groups had shut down their branch in North Korea in 2016 because of the sanctions applied on North Korea. And when we first discovered this attack was, we discovered it last year, and we believe that this attack was conducted in 2017. So we drove a graph here to shows the relationship between the O group, O bank, and the K telecom. And during the analysis, we have a hypothesis that the target should be the O bank in Egypt. In this case, we observed two interesting samples from targets in May last year. They are both exploit CVE 2017-0199, and they are both DOCX documents. And the exploit, this vulnerability, allow attacker to exploit a flaw that exists in the Windows OLE object interface to deliver malware through a fake HTA file. So upon opening the file, the document will connect to C2 server to download a fake HTA file, and which actually contains the malicious script. This is the screenshot we took when we opening the file. You will see, you can actually see this dialog indicating this is downloading something from a very suspicious address. And this graph is showing files in these samples. First, the document will document connects to the HTA file. Sorry, I can only point to this side. That's too far. Okay, yeah, the document download a fake HTA file which contains the PowerShell script, and the PowerShell script will download a Trojan downloader, a loader, and a script from the C2 server. And you can see there are two different C2 servers used in these two samples, and this file will be saved as two JPG file and a JS file. And of course, they are not real JPG file. And here's the screenshot showing the downloaded HTA file. You can see in this file there are some encoded PowerShell script. After decode, there's the actual script that's running, downloading from file, two JPG file and one IPP file from the C2 server. And the IPP file contains encoded VB script, which is will extract payload from the other two fake JPG file. It's also encoded, but after decode, you can see there's a function that I named it as C. And in this function, the script, it will locate the position 5651 and then extract an exe file from this position and save them into this naming convention, which make it look like a Windows update package. And the first PE file is a Trojan downloader, and the second one is the loader named Milk. So the first one, Trojan downloader, it's also named Frankie by Palo Alto. This Frankie downloader was discovered having overlap code with another malware called Rockrat, and this is a malware attributed to Reaper group. This downloader needs specific argument to execute. It supports three kinds of commands. One is help, which is perform main functions. It will collect system information and beacon to CNC server. And the second is console. It's used to set out the persistent in the registry. And the third argument is basically perform both help and console. And after the malware launch, it will retrieve the MAC address in the victim machine and then convert the MAC address to the hash string and use this hash string as the victim ID. And you see it will also collect information like computer name and some Ethernet MAC address, running process, and encode this information with a simple sub and XOR and send to the C2 server. After decode, you can see here's the plain text that's sent to the C2 server, including the victim data. And this downloader, it would download the payload from another CNC server and save them into the temp folder. In the functions that you can see after it downloads, it will try to launch this malware with a argument named obey, and this obey is actually mean father in Korean. So now another malware is the milk loader. This loader, we call it milk because we found this PDB string in this malware, and this is also called pool milk by Palo Alto. After launch, we'll sleep for 6 minutes and look for a temp file in the temp folder. However, in our case, we don't have this file. So we suspect that this malware, when the attacker doing attack, they already launched an initial attack. And this is probably the second stage attack to control, to maintain their foothold. And however, the malware is not the interesting part in this case. The interesting part in this case is about the decoy file. This is the first decoy file we found in these two samples. And you can see the title is ban liquidation. And this first decoy file actually look like receive that sent to the sender, means that the receiver have already read the email. And in here, we found the email address start with the name of the old bank, and then a domain name that is star-call.net.kp. This domain name, if you search it on the Google, you will find a Wikipedia page and tell you this domain is related to a company named Star Joint Venture. And the Star Joint Venture is an ISP providing internet access in North Korea. And so it's obviously this domain name is affiliated with the company. And this is the content of the second decoy file. This is an email writing to the targets. And based on last sample, this should be wrote by or forged as the identity of the old bank in North Korea. The email subject is bank liquidation, and this email is a little bit long, so I just call a few interesting part. The email first apologized for this very late notice of how liquidation was going on, and the writers say, they have been bad result. They have bad result of loan collection because of the UX sanctions on the DPRK. And the email also mentions about the sanctions are not only financial and economic domestic, but also other aspects are further affected a country. And the sanction thoroughly raising every source of hard currency income. The reason why we think this is interesting because this is possibly it's always been our hypothesis that we think probably this group, they are changing their target shift to target financial industry because of some economic issues happen to them. So this decoy is kind of have enforcement our hypothesis. And when we connect to the compromised website, we found that the directory browsing was actually not prohibited, so we can see the files on it and download some data from the server. Among all the files, we found a folder named A data, and in this A data, there are several different kind of folders in it, and if you pay attention, you will see this is actually the victim's ID, and inside the folder, it contains some victim data look like this. And after decoy, you can see the actual data. And we did discover an interesting folder which contained an interesting victim log. This log caught our attention because the victim has a kernel 32 version of operating system, but the MAC address is a MacBook. Therefore, we suspect this could be a testing log from the attacker. This is kind of weird, so we looked into the IP address and found that the IP address is located in Dandong in China. And Dandong is a place very close to Korean peninsula, so we think this IP address probably is belong to the attacker. And next, we want to mention about some recent change and discovery that we observed from their recent attack. One interesting thing about the CNC infrastructure is that in the past few years, most of the CNC server are compromised, and maybe they think it's free and they can abandon this C2 server easily, so they like to use compromised CNC server. However, when we investigated one of the case, we tried to retrieve the registration information from the hosting server provider, but the hosting server provider tell us that they cannot provide us the information because the owner is paying them with Bitcoins. And it's actually makes sense because it's a very effective way for the attacker, because with Bitcoin paying, they can keep anonymously and they don't need to spend time to search for legitimate server and hack them. However, I don't think paying with Bitcoin is a good idea because the price keep going up, and if I'm then I will keep it. And the next discovery is very interesting as well. During an incident response we conduct for a recent attack targeting financial sector in South Korea, we found that after the attacker compromised the machine, they implanted a miner into the victim system. With further investigation, we found a wallet address, and then with curiosity, we checked the wallet address, and then we found in September last year, the wallet contained 70 minerals, and it worth about $7,000 at that time. And we checked again this year in February, and we found that gains about 106 mineral coins, and it's about $25,000. So they have been earning some money recently. Before we jump to conclusion, very fast, we want to go through some TTP and key finding of their attack that we observed. So in our previous instance, we already mentioned about how they deliver with spear phishing email, and then they use some compromised CNC infrastructure. And what we didn't mention is that for some group, for example, Andero and Lazaro, in their proprietary malware, they like to use some shared code between this malware. So it's easy to, not easy, but it's a good way to identify their proprietary malware with this function. And also, I have mentioned they sometimes like to use open source tool too. And in some cases, for example, the case happened in Taiwan last year, they used ransomware to do the destroy the evidence and tracks of them. And then we also discover in some of the attack, they like to use multi-stage payload, like the downloader to download the payload and the payload download another payload to decrease the opportunity of the expose of their real payload. And regarding the targets, when they target banks, they are very focused on targeting the SWIFT system. And in the incident, it shows that they are very familiar with the SWIFT network. And in some cases, we also noticed that they will try to do the SWIFT transaction during holiday or weekend because nobody is in the office and nobody has and it would buy them some time to do the transaction before it being discovered. And in many cases, we discovered that before doing transaction, they actually have a long time of controlling the internal network. So before they doing the real attack, they have penetrated the victim for a long time. Okay, so we collect the sample compile timestamp of the Andero go and make this graph when we set the time zone to GMT plus 9. And we found this interesting peak during 8 in the morning to 12, and then drop dramatically during noon, and then climb again in the afternoon. It's kind of match our working time. So we suspect these groups of hackers, they are a bunch of hackers, they are doing this for living, and they are doing this for work, and that's why we suspect they are nation state. Okay, conclusion. We have seen an increased trend of nation-state actors using their cyber espionage capability for financial gains. And in this research, we introduced some attack cases from Lazaro, Vulnerable, Andero, and Reaper Group. They targeted not only banks, but also Bitcoins, exchange in user and ATM machine. And in many cases, the attackers show strong knowledge to the compromised system, their network environment. It means that they study hard about their targets. They tailor their tools and develop exploit to focus on their target network. And it's also difficult to track this group only with the CNC infrastructure because, like I mentioned, they use compromised server. Therefore, be familiar with their tools and tactics, one of the key to defense against them. So it means that they study hard about us, so we need to study hard about them too. Okay, thank you. Any questions? No question? Here's our email address. If you have any questions, feel free to send us an email, and we'll be happy to answer your question. Okay, thank you very much.